Hey everyone, and welcome to flm204 here at FX PhD. I'm John Montgomery, and we're going to cover a little bit of the more in the expressions and more part of our course, and that's going to be the timeline. Basically, we're going to be presenting that from the standpoint, of my perspective, which is a flame artist and the way I use it. But I think the smoke people who are in the class will really enjoy it because, batch effects and everything is pretty new to the product over on the smoke line. So hopefully you'll pick up some tricks. For the flame folks, I'll show you why you want to be using it and so forth. And we're going to start with some kind of under the hood stuff because it's really important to know what's going on, and I'll show you some gotchas if you're not careful. I'm going to be using this clip just as a starting point. It's, of course, an FX Guide TV segment that we had, and it's from a Final Cut Pro XML file, and, of course, the one from Amsterdam with Jeff and I. And what's really cool, now, this is only one, timeline layer, I guess, here, but what's cool about Final Cut Pro XML is you can bring multi-layer timelines in. It's really useful, and even have certain things come across like I think there's some soft effects. See, there's like audio gains and keyframes that end up coming up as well. So pretty useful stuff. But like I said, we're going to start with some technology, I guess, under the hood. And we're going to start in the preferences because I think that's the easiest place to start and explain things. Clip history. Now, I am the poster boy for clip history and clip history corruption. I had some serious problems. I've been using it from day one, and man, I lost actually almost, days of work using it, but I really like the promise of it, and over the years they've improved it, and actually to the point where it's really stable, and actually much more stable than it was in the past, and also much speedier. They're doing optimization mechanisms to speed up clip history, because if you have a long timeline, a lot of stuff hidden in it, it can take quite a bit of time to save. Now, for those of you who are afraid of it, I just want to point out the clip history is used whenever using the edit timeline and batch effects, okay? So even though you might have this off thinking you're not using history, if you're going to use the timeline editing, you are actually using history, okay? So that's what I want to talk about. Just give a little background of history here to start off. Let's go ahead and turn this on, and we'll leave this to keep none. I've got just a quick clip here. I'll just do, say, 90 frames of it, 100 frames. And let's go ahead and go into color correct. Hey, one thing too, I just want to notice that when you bring in clips from QuickTime, just to double check frame rates and so forth, if you hold the V key, you can see there's a little note icon here, right? That signifies that there's a note attached. If you hold the V key, you can see the original movie rate on import was 23,976. So there are occasionally some issues with frame rate conversions and so forth from QuickTime to Flint, Flame, or Inferno. But again, that's just a nutty little thing. And also, it's kind of nice to have notes, I guess. Okay, so anyway, let's go ahead and go into the color corrector. And I'll just reset this. We'll just do a quick grade on this. I'll do the old shadows, and then midtones will bring up a little warmer. And it's going to look kind of gross, but anyway, you'll get the point. I just want to make a couple things that are different here so we can see what's going on and understand what's going on under the hood. So go ahead and do that. Process that out. And then let's go ahead and go back in and do it again. And I'll just reset all, and here let's just batch the saturation off a little bit, really increase the contrast, just really back off the saturation like that, and maybe just take a master and kind of, oh, that's really ugly, control to reset that. Okay, so let's go ahead and just process that. And again, what's happening by this is it's actually just keeping track as you go with the clip history. The idea behind it is keeping track of the setups that you use. So it's saving a setup along with it. So you can see these are my two things. And let's do another step. Let's go ahead and use one of my new favorite tools, Sapphire Vignette. And we'll go ahead and just turn auto key off. And yeah, we'll leave it here and process that. And basically we're getting two steps here, and the idea behind clip history is allows you to recreate things without saving setup. Now notice I'm not saving any of these setups. Okay, normally that's something you want to do even if you have clip history on, right? So let's go ahead and do this. And again, it's really true that you should be probably a little less afraid of clip history. In fact, not probably, you should be. They've done a lot of things, and again, batch effects, if you're using that, and especially in smoke, they're using it all the time, right? That's what you're doing. Okay, so we've got this one. Let's go ahead and save this. I'm going to save this as Angie V2, V1, and save this as Angie V2. Let's go ahead and just save this in my desktop. And let's go ahead here and hit load to get there. I'm actually going to do a new reel to hide these. Sorry about that. Okay, so we got these now, V1 and V2. Now up here, you have some expand options up in the upper right-hand corner. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and say, select both of these clips. And what you can do is you can say, show history. Okay, so what these are made up. You can see I've got NG version 2 selected. You can see that hidden inside here are effectively clips that kind of keep track of things. So I've got my audio tracks, my 4 audio tracks, which of course are part of this original clip. And what I have here is I have this thing that says Edit 01 Transfer. That's the name of our original clip on our desktop. I have an untitled thing that says Color Correct. And then here, effectively, is my final clip that says Sapphire Vignette. Now, why are these unrendered? Because I said keep none. All right? That's what I told it to do. So it's only keeping the last thing that we did. But these, again, are giving you kind of clues as to what's going on. Actually, if you can load this up to the desktop and click this in, you'll actually kind of load up the setups that you had for that clip. Now it's finding my clip. Let's just do this really quickly. I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to trash this clip. Okay, I'm going to drag it down here, empty it, make sure I don't have it here in the library, which I don't believe. And then just to make sure it's really in the undo buffer, we'll go ahead here and go into storage, and I'll force a purge to get rid of that clip. Now, what happens is when I double click this segment now, let's go ahead and just double click our first color corrector. We should be taken back into the color correct module with this clip. So I'll double click the H. And notice this clip has unrendered history. Edit anyway, confirm. Basically, I've got a black frame here with my color correction setup. And the reason that is because this clip I have clip history on is actually not carrying along these clips with it. Okay, so once I delete it from my desktop, it's actually not going to find this original clip. Okay, so what can we do about that? Let's go ahead now and we'll go to Preferences, General, and we'll change this to Keep Sources. Go ahead and exit out. And now let's have a different stab with another clip. So let's go ahead and load in another clip here. Just load in this. And let's go ahead and just click this off and kind of do the same thing just really, really quickly. Let me go ahead and drag these down. And go to Color Correct. And just do a little contrast. Saturation down. Do that shadows trick thingy. It's my gimmick. And then midtones, bring those up. Alright, whatever. That's fine for this. Again, the idea is showing you what happens. So go ahead and process this. And then we'll go ahead and go into the vignette. And now let's go ahead and call this Angie version 3. Save that to our library. And now let's go ahead and take a look at those. Let me go ahead and hide history, but let's open up this one. Show history. And you can see what happens here is we have now this gets carried along with our original clip because you can see there's an image there. All right. This thing is not. This color correct, this kind of intermediate step that we do between the original source material is a capture off tape, say, or an import from the file system. Then you have color correct, there's nothing there, and then our final clip here. Let's just go ahead and really quickly, just to pound that point home, let's go into color correct here. And let's go ahead and just take the saturation down to 0. Process that baby out. Okay, and go ahead and save this as Angie version 4. Go ahead and load. Just ease of sake, we'll go ahead and hide history again. I'm doing that up here in the corner. Okay, you can't, it's off the recording, you just can't see it. And we'll go ahead and show history, and look what we've got here. So again, now you can see on this clip, we have Angie version 3 here, and this vignette is unrendered, so, as is the color correct. The original is there. And then if we open up Angie version 3, I'll go ahead and say show history. You can see that The vignette is here in this version, okay? So basically, it's keeping this original source, but not the intermediates. And so that's where this comes in. Keep sources and intermediates, and it'll keep basically everything. Now, that can be actually quite, frame store intensive if you're going to do that, if you would, because you can imagine you're maintaining a lot of intermediates. The key is, as long as you have your original sources, all the intermediates in theory are things you've created. So, I don't know. I will generally keep sources if I'm going to do it, or keep none. All right, so that's clip history in a nutshell. Again, this can get a bit weighty if, say, you take a clip into an action setup and you've got a ton of 3D geometry and so forth, or pass it through multiple times. You've got lots of things, so it can take up, some time to save the desktop and so forth. And that's in general why I think people in general probably turn that off. All right. But let's now talk about what we can do in the timeline and in editing and so forth. So in Smoke, you've really got the edit desk. So you've got the timeline right there. You do all your editing there. In Flint, Flame, and Inferno, there are two areas actually where you have the timeline. One is the desktop player. The other is batch. Now you have a lot more functionality in batch, but there is quite a bit of you can do in the desktop player. Basically, in the desktop player, you're going to be modifying stuff that already exists in your timeline as opposed to adding to it. So let's go ahead and take a look at this clip. Go ahead and go back here, and it's just that effects guide clip. One of the nice things about it is that you can just really quickly do easy things like reposition something, a color corrector, spark, or resize. But before we begin into that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about navigation in the timeline. So here's your timeline. These scroll bars here can move in time. So let's go ahead first, and if we take this and scroll up, you can see that we have kind of a more fine view of our timeline, of course, and then you can go ahead and scroll this to get back to home. You do home. Same thing here on this side. If you click here and drag like this, it expands it vertically, and you can actually see quite a bit of information about the clips here. So that can be pretty useful for you. Again, you can see this is an XML document that came in. It said Final Cut Pro Color Corrector. The information wasn't transferred, but actually shows that there's a Final Cut color corrector there. All right, so let's go ahead and hit home. And let's go ahead and talk about just getting around from shot to shot. In Flame, and again, I'm going to use Flame because I actually don't know the Smoke hotkeys. I'm not in there enough, and they are vastly different in many cases. So it can be pretty confusing at times. But there's a mechanism from going from previous to next. Actually, I've got my keyboard here. Actually, is a Smoke keyboard, so I've got the hotkeys marked. So previous and next on Smoke are Z and X. On Flame, they're B and N, so back for back, N for next. Okay, and that's dependent upon where this little focus thing is here, okay? So notice since it's resting here on this, it's going to go the next transition, or back. If I bring this down like this, it's going to go to that transition, okay? So it's depending upon your focus, it depends upon what your back and next would do. All right, so let's just go ahead and dive into some stuff. Just talk about something you might do, simple things in the timeline. You have these buttons here that allow you, as I said, to do various things. Now, if this was a Smoke timeline and the Smoke editor had done some soft effects in it, these are called soft effects, they would transfer over here because it's effectively using the same timeline. What you don't have access to are batch effects, all right? But let's go ahead and do this. We'll go ahead and, since I'm resting on this, we'll go ahead and hit color correct. And you can see that we get this little line here. It signifies something is going on. And to get those controls, we can just hit this editing button, and we get a couple, really simple controls here. Contrast, offset, gain, saturation, and hue. So let's just go ahead. I'll go ahead and do this. Let's go ahead and take our saturation down. It can, of course, be the color corrector or the color warper. But if you want more control, you can go ahead and go here in the edit, and there you've got your full color correction capability that you know and love from the color corrector. All right, what's a common task? A common task that you want to do is copy the grade from here to here, right? Because it's obviously the same scene. And there are a couple ways of doing this. If we take this and expand it down, not that one, actually, this one over here. we can do that. But another way of actually getting more room is if I click here on this and drag down, you can see that I can get more information. If we look at this, there's this little color correct here. So what I can do is I can actually drag this color correction from this segment onto the next one. So if I go ahead and hit Control, you can see that this changes to an arrow, and I can actually click this and drag this to a new segment, and I get that grade applied to her. Really cool shortcut. I was actually Brian Higgins from Soul Design Effects was over here today, and I was talking with him about some cool stuff to show in the timeline, what he thought, and also running some stuff that gotchas by him that we have run into. And he gave me this one. Now, what you can do is when you're resting on a clip, notice you can see that chiclet turn on. I call it a chiclet turn on blue, like that. And it also depends if you have it selected. You can see that I've got that color correction for this clip or this clip, but then not for this one. But a really easy way to get the color corrector from here to this clip without expanding the timeline is by using hotkeys. Now look at this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These signify that what you can do is you can hit Control 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to get access to those. So if the color corrector says 4, so I'm going to hit Control 4. See how that light turns on there? I'm going to hold Control, hold it over this clip, and then when I drag it, you can see I dragged off a color corrector, and now I can drag that on there. All right, so that's a really easy way as opposed to expanding out. And Brian, that's a good one. Brian actually did the masterclass tour in Asia that I did last year, and I'm trying to wrangle him into doing some classes for us at some point. But anyway, so that's a really nice shortcut for doing that. So, okay, so that's looking good. But let's talk a little bit more in depth about other stuff that we can do here. You can, of course, add time warps and so forth by selecting a clip and hitting time warp, and then you get time warp controls. We could anchor the in, and then I could change the speed here to say 125 to make us talk faster. Why you'd want to do that, I don't know. To reset that, all you have to do is go ahead and hit the control button to reset that. Let me go ahead and turn that back on. If you want to leave that on there, let me do it actually with another thing. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and take the color correct and just do like that. Really ugly. But what I want to show you, if you hit Control, or I'm sorry, if you just tap on this, it will actually mute it. And what mute does is actually just temporarily disables that color correction. You save all the setups, so if I hit it again, you've got it back again, and you can save it. Alt again will remove that for you. All right. But one thing I want to do, and really common with clients, right, is you do this grade, and let's suppose we did this grade to a big long segment of someone talking, a big interview, and you had a ton of shots. And they go, oh, you know what, I'd just like it to be slightly less saturated, like 2% less saturated. And you're going, you do your eye roll, and you sigh, and you go and you change all those. Well, there's a cool feature called gap effects, okay? And what gap effects does, it allows you to kind of apply soft effects to kind of phantom segments, I call them. What we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add another video layer. And what a video layer is, a video layer allows you to do kind of vertical compositing, okay? Kind of a top-down thing, kind of like in Final Cut, also in Avid. And really quickly, let me go ahead and show you that. What I can do is I can go ahead and drag a segment. I'm going to undo that. Let me go ahead and go back here to the beginning. I have this thing called, if we go ahead and I'm going to turn that off, I've got snap positioner here, right? So what I'm going to do is just drag this up here to the layer above, and I'll do that by holding down Alt-Shift, and I'll drag a copy up, and I have snap to positioner on. I'm going to go ahead and just actually turn that off, and what I want to do is kind of slide this so it's kind of offset in time like this. And just to explain and show you what's going on, you wouldn't do this ordinarily, but you can see here it's seeing that bottom layer, and we cut back here to the beginning, and again, let's this is maybe a better place to do it. Go ahead and drag this over here. You can see that there, and then comes back. Okay, so what a video layer does is allows you to do effectively vertical compositing, and that's kind of how you do it if you want to have multiple things stacked up. It also allows you to do versioning as well, and I'm going to show that in batch in just a second. That's different from, say, a video track, which is actually self-contained. And if I do a video track up here, all right, you're not going to get any vertical compositing. I focus on that track by hitting the P, and again, you're not seeing anything, all right? No vertical compositing is going on. So that's the difference between a layer and a track. And I'm going to go ahead and just drag this down. Do that by dragging that box and down to the bottom of the screen and trashing it. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a gap effect, and that's effectively taking a segment. If I select this, you've actually got kind of a phantom segment here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually come down here, and I'm going to go to this edit point, and I'm going to move this up, and I'm going to add a cut. And you do that by hitting the delete key. That's the delete key over near the numeric keypad, okay? And that's a cut. Notice what happens. See that line? You get a little cut there. Now, when I select that, it selects that segment, and this it selects this invisible segment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that segment, and I'm going to turn color corrector on for it. How cool is that? It makes a black frame. What's happening here is I've got this set up for real-time playback, and that's going to guarantee real-time playback, no frame drops, 100% quality. If we take this down and do preview effects, we can preview soft effects that need to be rendered. And you can see here that these dashes indicate that I need to render something. This is that didn't need rendering, but this needs to be rendered. So what I'll do is I'll take this, and I've got the color corrector turned on, and let's just go ahead and take that saturation down to 0. And now you can see that all these scenes have color correction applied to it. Now this is, applying it, this isn't applied in a non-destructive manner necessarily. If you crank up the highlights, you're not going to be able to bring the highlights back in here in this case, unless you have real high bit depth. But again, in general, that's not the case. This is applying a second color correction on top of the original one. But let's go ahead, and I'll just take this down to, say, saturation of 50. All right, and say that's where we want to do it. And now what we want to do is we actually want to render that, okay? So what I can do is I can take these scenes that need to be rendered, and I can just say timeline process, and it's going to process those. And you can see process 1 of 4, these 4 segments. Since I have it selected, it's not going to process my entire timeline. And that would allow me to then, at this point, go ahead and do real-time playback. And it's really critical that you process your timelines before you output them to tape. I believe it in every single case is going to warn you that you might have unrendered segments. But again, that's something that you want to remember to do whenever you do that kind of thing within this timeline in either smoke or flame. Now I'm going to go ahead and stop this really quick. I'm just going to abort it and just take a look at this nomenclature here. You can see what happens. You can see these clips ended up being a solid black line, which means they've been rendered. This part still needs to be rendered, as does this. So if we go ahead and let's go ahead and just select these things again, we'll go ahead and timeline process and get that processed for us when we're doing that. So again, I think you can see that there is some usefulness in things that you can do right here in the timeline in the desktop. But personally, I feel that what they really need to do at Discrete, or Autodesk, excuse me, is take what's available in the batch timeline and actually bring that out to the desktop. I actually want a Flame desktop with an editing timeline that you can drop stuff into. It's kind of interesting. I'm not going to show you a lot of like editing from a source to record timeline today. I'm just going to show you this kind of stuff that you can do. It's really easy. Just taking already assembled edit. There's multiple layers. So go ahead and let that process out. And then I'm just going to do that and show you how it ends up being a real time. So now I can go back to real time, and you're going to actually see these segments play back correctly. So let's go ahead and take a look at doing this in batch, and let's go out to the desktop. Now, one thing you old-timer Flame people want to know is that when you've got a multi-layer timeline, don't try and do swap shot, okay? Don't try and do that. Stick with a single layer timeline. It's just not going to work. There are certain cases where you might think it works, where I could swap a shot here into this timeline. Everything's going to work fine. I really suggest avoiding it. It's not intended to do that. And I haven't actually found a really consistent time in which it's going to work all the time. So I just avoid doing that. If I'm going to start swapping stuff in and changing it, I'm going to go into batch and do that. So let's go ahead and head into batch. So if I hit control and hit batch, it allows me to go into batch with a clip. So I'll go ahead and select this. I'm not holding control anymore, which means I'll just select the one clip. So go ahead and tap this destination here, and I got my clip. If we scroll down here in the timeline, what's annoying is the batch duration is set to 100, and this is 6,700 frames approximately. But instead of hitting the number like you used to have to in the past, basically all you have to do is hit T, click, and you get that duration set here in your timeline duration. So quite nice. Now you can see that we've got a few more options here, especially things like batch effects that we'll be using. So let's go ahead and play around with these knuckleheads here. And we'll go ahead and do a pre-batch effects. In other words, kind of dive into the segment, do something, and have it kind of appear back here. So here we are now. You can see that we're in a batch effects view. You can see by this that we're actually going into batch effects at an upper level, and you can actually exit batch directly from here if you wanted to, or go up one level to the previous one. So let's go ahead and go back in. And what are we going to do? Let's go ahead. I'm looking a little saturated, right? So let's go ahead and drag in the color corrector here. Take our saturation down. And look, like I've had a few too many. Let's go ahead and exit back out, or I'm sorry, let's go ahead and add another spark here. And let's do Sapphire Vignette. And if I shift here, go ahead and drag that in, edit it, and we'll use my favorite, subtract, invert. There we go. And so now we've got a string here of a color correct and a spark. Now admittedly there's the things you might be able to do in the timeline, but let's say you wanted to come in here and, let's say, patch the beer. You could actually do an action setup here, do the patch, and have that as part of this segment. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead. We've got this set up here, and we'll go ahead and exit out of batch. And if we come out here, you've got that dashed line, right? And that signifies that that has not been rendered. All right. Now we've got this other clip down here, just like before. What we can do is go ahead and control drag down and drop that on there, and we've got that applied. Double click there, you can see that we've got the spark and the color correct node set in there. Now one quick thing, Brian Higgins, we were talking about this, and I'm a fan of reusing stuff. I'm going to go ahead and name this. I'm going to just go ahead and say this name grade AMS. And I'm going to disconnect these two things here. I've got the branch selected, and if I go ahead, I've got Alt and Caps Lock selected, and if I bring this here, I can actually save my own custom nodes. That's what these bins are here for. You have a project bin and user bin. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this in a project, so that's available. It means it's available to other users. It's going to take the name here of this. So go ahead and drag this down like this. See, that switches to plus, and now we've got grade AMS for Grade Amsterdam. So go ahead and drag this down here like that. And what we could do is then use that anywhere in batch. As opposed to doing batch effects, you could just go ahead and drag this out in your batch schematic, and you've got a spark and a color correct. So that's kind of cool, actually. A quick little batch tip. That's what those are for. Again, project, share it, part of the project, user, keep it to yourself. The spirit of FXPHD, we keep them in the project area. All right, well, exit batch effects. We've got that set up. And now let's go ahead and take a look at this segment here. In this segment, I'm just going to apply and do something the same for all this, okay? All these clips at once. And what we want to do is we want to take this, and we'll take and select these clips here. Oops, I got that gap here. So let's go ahead and select all these clips continuously by holding Shift. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a post batch, all right? What happens with a post batch? Let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to hit post. We get dropped into a batch node here. We've got one segment feeding, but if you look, I've got the actual whole timeline here. All right, edited together. So then what we could do is, if we wanted to, we could go ahead and add our effects to it. So I could actually take this, drop this in here, go ahead and take that to that like that. And again, nice how they did that. So you can actually, you don't need to cut it first before you reconnect. And I've got that. Now, you probably wouldn't want to do the same thing to all of it, but again, this idea of what I'm showing you here, you've got the timeline here. Now, again, you could dive inside here, this clip first, and say fix something, okay? So you could actually go in and, remove something in the scene by going ahead and doing pre-batch effects. And now you can see I've got exit batch effects 2, exit all batch effects, and then exit batch. So to go up one level, we'll just go ahead and do that. So now I've got a batch effect inside a batch effect. And if we go back here on main level, actually we'll go back to batch, you can actually see that this clip here has become one segment, okay? One edit. And inside here, that's where you can actually start adjusting your edits if you needed to slip, slide, or trim. Okay? And while we're doing that, let's go ahead and talk about trim. I kind of glossed over that a little bit. Let's come over here and we'll just do it with Angie. do it on this scene. We'll come down here. Basically what you do is you can turn on the trim node. And generally I'm working with ripple off, because what I'm doing with my commercials, I'm serious. I'm not doing serious editing. This is just the kind of stuff that I'm adjusting things, right? Let's go ahead and zoom in here. We got trim selected. And if I hold Alt and /, that's that slash near the right-hand shift button, you just can see it switches to a slip icon, and so I can just go ahead and slip this shot like that to adjust it. Okay? If I go ahead and leave this like this, you can go ahead and now adjust this without changing the duration of your cut. You're just basically changing the edit point. Okay? Go ahead and undo that. Same thing here at the end. Okay? Undo that. And if we go out home, I'm just going to show you why I don't have ripple on. If we go ahead and have ripple on, what we can do is you can go ahead and slide this out, and you're actually adjusting the duration of your video layers. And that's generally what I'm not wanting to do. I'm actually just wanting to go ahead and slip and trim and slide and things like that. So again, I generally will work with ripple off. Okay, so that's a really basic quick look at some of the things that you can do with the batch effects and so forth here within batch. Let's go ahead and exit out. Now take a look at our desktop. What we have a clip that's outlined in magenta, and it says unrendered frame. And we hit play. That's just because we had done those slips without actually reprocessing it. So what you can do is you can actually go ahead here and hit timeline process, and then that will go ahead and process those frames that need to be processed there at the beginning of the edit. Again, that's something I sometimes forget to do. You can do that again before you leave batch, but again, if you're going to come out on your desktop and you see unrendered frames, that's generally what's going to happen. It's just a good idea to go ahead and get those committed and make sure that they're all ready to go. The nice thing about that not rendering is you don't have to sit around and wait for things to render, but again, at some point you will have to render before you export it or lay it off to videotape and so forth. So that's a good procedure to do. Okay, but the other thing about this is look what had happened actually on the desktop where we had that pink outline, and why did we have another clip? We had something, and it says, I'm not sure if you can see here, but it says FX Guide TV Ep038, that's what this is called, and then it has a parentheses E1. Well, that's because in my preferences I have something that says create a clip copy for edit. So anytime I have a clip and I modify a clip in batch, it's going to actually create a new copy of that clip. This is basically signifying it's taking this clip, it's made a copy of it to that. So let's go ahead and go into batch. Let's go ahead and zoom in. Let me go ahead and just slip this again. Doesn't really matter what I do. I'm just wanting to change this, right? So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and exit batch. We've got something now that says E2. Go back into batch. Drag this like that. Exit out. E3. So it's making a separate copy for each and every clip that I take in to batch. And that can be really useful. It can help you save versions and so forth. You know you're not getting rid of it. Now what I find actually is if I'm doing a lot of editing, it gets a little bit confusing when I'm doing this. So my preference I like doing is setting this preference to say modify desktop clip. This is kind of the same behavior as if you take a clip into the player here and edit it. When you come out, it's not creating a new clip for you. You're actually modifying that original. My thinking is that if I want to create a copy of a clip and modify it, if I want to have a backup version, I'm going to go ahead and do spacebar drag to create a copy of the clip. Or if you're in a smoke, just go ahead and make a copy of it. So I'm going to say, okay, FX Guide TV episode 038B. Let's go ahead and go back into batch, hit Alt, so I have a new batch setup, desk, and bring this in. And now I've got this clip. Let's go ahead here and just take this clip. Let's go ahead and well, let's just go ahead and take this actually. Let's go ahead and take the color correction that we have set up here and just take the saturation down to 0 so we know we did something. I'll exit out of batch. And now that original clip that I took in is unrendered and has a magenta outline, but it hasn't created a new clip. It did actually name it E1. Okay, so that's going to happen sometimes. I actually didn't think it did that before. That's, I think, something new, maybe not. But anyway, it hasn't created a new clip, and it just signifies that it's been edited. Okay, so if I go ahead and take this out here, I can go ahead and render that and be set up and ready to go like normal. All right. So those are the two differences and why you might want to use a modified desktop clip or create a clip copy for edit. Now I was talking to Brian, and occasionally if I'm doing a big edit job, I'll say go ahead and use the edited library. Okay, so what happens in that case? Let's go ahead and turn that on. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I took a single frame, copy that. I'm going to name this C. Let's go into batch. Take that clip in. I'm actually going to delete that just so I'm totally clear here. Okay, so here's this. Let's go ahead and take this and my color correct for this. Let's go ahead and take that back up to 150 so it's really saturated like that. And we'll go ahead and slide this like that and exit out of batch. You come out here, there's nothing new on the desktop, right? I have this version C. If we go into library, I'll hit load. You have a new library called edited. And in this Flame session, you've got this new edited clip here in your library. So let's go ahead and go back into batch. We'll go ahead and say take this and take the saturation back down to 0. Exit. Let's go and hit the library. And you've got this edited library clip here. We go ahead and load this. Hit this on the desktop. You can see that we've got her in black and white. In preferences, it's not going to create a new copy every time. It's actually going to create a new edit library for each setup that you do. Okay, so let's go into batch. Let's go ahead and save this setup as my test. Now we've got a clip. You can edit that like that. We'll exit batch. Go into library, and now I have FXPHD my test. It's got a unique identifier and my new edit here as well. Okay, so that's what the edited library does. Again, to recap, edited library will save your clips in an edited library. It will save it based upon the setup name that you have. So if you want to save multiple versions, save your setup multiple times right there in batch. You also have the ability to create a clip copy for your edit or modify the desktop clip. You can also lock edited clips, which means this is our final one, I'll tell you. Let's go ahead and we're going to say modify desktop clip. Let's go ahead and take this into batch, and let's go ahead and alt, bring this here. I'm just going to go ahead and trim this a little bit to just signify the change. Exit batch, and we come out. You can see it's got that highlight here. All right. And it's also got something that says it's locked, okay? So I actually can't delete it. You need to actually go ahead and take the lock clip and go ahead and turn the lock off. And now you could delete it if you wanted to, okay? You wouldn't want to because, again, I was modifying my original there. But, again, those are all your options. So there's a multitude of options for you in the batch editing setup. My preference, this is what I like doing. I mentioned it in the forums. I'm going to turn that off, and in general, I'm going to modify desktop clip. All right, so the last thing I want to do today is just take a look at showing you just something to be aware of when you're working in batch and with batch effects. I'm going to use this example, but kind of related to that thing I told you about earlier, that it's doing some things under the hood and taking care of some things to protect you, but it's really important for you to know how things are working, all right? So let's go ahead and go into batch. I'll just reset everything and bring her in the front and the mat in. And logic ops. I'll go ahead and bring this in as the back. Let's bring this in as the front. And that in as the mat, and here's our key. We'll go ahead and just change this to a blend, and I know I've got some edging issues on here, but that's not kind of what we're here for. I'll go ahead and I'll take this to output. All right. So here's this that we've got set up, all right? This isn't just your normal batch setup or whatever, and I've got this kind of colored, this logo colored this way here. If I exit out of batch, okay, things I've done before is kind of done something like change this, knowing they'll update that batch setup. So let's go ahead and just take this and do a color correct. And let's just swing our hue around. Like that. And I'll go ahead and process this clip and then kind of replace it. Okay, so we've got a different color here for Angie Richards. And I do this a lot. I mean, I'll make an adjustment here. maybe on the desktop, something quick and easy. Go ahead and drop it on top of this. Go back into batch, and I'll expect it to have that new color here, right? So that loads correctly, kind of what you would think. Okay, but now let's talk about our new world, if you would. Our world where we're actually going to take this clip and maybe do a batch effects on it, okay? Maybe I want to go and do the super that way. So let's go ahead and do a pre-batch effects. Let's go ahead and bring in this matte and the alpha. And we'll go ahead and drop our logic op in here. Of course, that doesn't connect the right way. We'll take this like this, like this. We exit out batch effects. Oh, did it again, didn't I? Go ahead and put this to blend. And I've got my Angie Richards clips here, like that. We'll exit batch. And now I've got her set up. So let's go ahead and, I shouldn't have done that actually. Let's go ahead and force a render with that. That's actually done under force render editing. I'll go ahead and just tip that down, and it'll render the batch effects that we have set up right there on your desktop so we can take a look at it. All right, so we've got that set up like that. All right, now let's go ahead and take this clip and let's go ahead and do what we did before. Let's go to color correct. Make this big blue color like that. Have it animate in colors. That's beautiful. And we'll go ahead. It's going to really tell us if we've made this change or not. All right, so what I've done is I create a new version. I'm going to replace it just like we did before. Let's go ahead and drag that down, and this clip now has beautiful rotating color on it. Let's go back into batch. Okay, take a look here. This clip on our desktop, or not desktop, but first layer batch, we've got rotating color here, right? Let's take this down here. Now we're looking at this because it's rendered, right? We've already rendered this. But what happens if we go into batch effects? Let's double click this to get into batch effects. And lo and behold, look what we have. We actually have the original clip that we did when we brought it into batch. So the thing to remember is whenever you bring a clip in here, okay, it's no longer referencing the clip on your desktop or referencing the clip with the same name in your library. It's this clip in your batch setup. Now that can be really useful because if you happen to lose the render, you want it to render correctly, and that's why that decision was made of doing things this way. But there's a big distinction between this clip here, it's in a batch effects, and then this clip here, that's just out in our normal batch setup, okay? So again, just something to be aware of when you're working here within batch and batch effects. Okay, well that really just scratched the surface of some things that you can do with batch effects and how they work. I hope this kind of inspires you to at least give them a try because I think they can be really useful. I was talking to Brian again today about it, and what was really nice about it is he actually just created an entire spot in batch because you can just take the clip into batch, go apply color corrections, you could apply some sparks, some vignetting and stuff like that, and it's just much easier than going in, matching a shot out of a single layer here on a desktop, taking it to action and doing all your grading that way. So again, I hope you kind of see where that can be useful. And for those of you who are more familiar with smoke, I hope that you at least gain some insight into some of the things that happen inside batch effects and how to do that. Well, we've already run over this week, so what we'll do is start next week with a further look at the batch timeline just to kind of keep some consistency in the classes. And we'll do that stuff that I talked about earlier, like editing from one clip, having a source clip in batch and editing it into a record clip, swapping shots in, marking in and out, things like that. Right now we just looked at having an already assembled timeline and doing things to it. Next week we'll talk about just taking clips and putting them into the timeline and so forth, as well as some cool techniques for, tracking versions using your timeline. I mean, I think that's one of the great things about it. If you're working in commercials, especially, clients will have you change those all the time. And what we can do is actually manage that in our timeline. Well, that's it for this week. If there's anything else you'd like to see, drop us a line in the forums. And until next week, I'm John Montgomery. Thanks for being part of FX PhD. See ya.